settlement gets
But what goes around must come around, and what goes up has gotta come down. And the higher the peak, the farther the fall to the ground. It was good while it lasted, but this good thing has come to an end. It was good while it lasted, but this is the end.
The reason I call it die-off is because I see a really horrible future coming. It's not one that I want.
It was good while it lasted, but this good thing has come to an end. It was good while it lasted. This is the end. This is the end. This is the end. This is the end.
The live stream is right to watching. Here it is. There's your live chat. How do I make it pop out? It might be easier to look at it this way in this long version like that. Okay. Can you see the comments now?
Barely. I'd like to get rid of the keyboard if I could and just see the comments. Can I do that?
Yes. So the way to do that is you go, oh, turn it sideways again. There, and you can just scroll through like this. That's as many as there are, so you're fine right now. It only starts to keyboard if you type in there. And then to make the keyboard go, yeah, you can do that, or
I got that. I got it.
or
I
the,
figured
or
it
you hit
out.
the keyboard
Okay.
and then tap the keyboard so that makes it go away.
Let's see.
Ready?
Are we live?
Yeah. Well, hold on, I'm gonna put you on.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream for today, which is Friday, August 28th, 2020. I'm Guy McPherson, coming to you from Central Florida. Just making sure the system is working now. Thank you for the comments. Hello from New Mexico, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, from Vancouver Island, from Fort Lauderdale. I do not know the latest methane readings from the East Siberian Arctic Shelf, ESAS. Can you hear me? Yes. Echo. There's an echo, apparently. Or maybe that's just me stuttering, repeating myself. We'll give this another minute for people to show up. Hello from Madison. Hi, Trish Kaiser from Central Florida. We're going to wait a minute or two. People are still trickling in to the room, virtually. You're very quiet. I will put my headphones in.
You should pull that closer to you.
Okay. And I can pull this closer to me. And I can speak in a louder tone of voice.
That's even better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's better if you speak up.
Can you turn that fan on?
Okay, hold on. I know. I know we did this before, but if you're going to talk softer.
Thank you, Nimbus 811, and welcome to Climate Defenders. Ditto to Alex Roebuck. Thank you for joining the channel as members. Hello, Osama number 5. Where were the first of 4 Osamas, by the way? I haven't seen them around here. Dan, greetings yourself. Nimbus 811, hello from Clearwater. I mean, hello to Clearwater. And you don't need a pop filter on an SM58. Okay. Can we get that in English for those of us who are technologically challenged? I don't want to speak up. That's why we have this technology. Is this an SM58? Is that what this is?
Sure.
Is it an SM58? Because somebody said I don't need a pop filter with an SM58, so I didn't know if that's what. This is an SM58. Whew. All right. Hi from Beaverton, Oregon. Hi to Beaverton, Oregon. Sorry to learn that, Osama number 5. And, okay. I'm going to start by providing a little context. I would encourage each of you to read one of my very recent peer-reviewed articles in Earth and Environmental Science Research and Reviews. It's titled The Role of Conservation Biology in Understanding the Importance of Arctic Sea Ice. It's by me, and you can find it at guymcpherson.com. I list several of my recent peer-reviewed articles at the bottom or in the middle of recent blog posts, and you can also find it under a tab, something about publications or I don't know. Anyway, it's not that difficult to find. So this paper emphasizes the role of conservation biologists in understanding environmental change and specifically rapid environmental change for organisms. And it's a review of the latest evidence. And I'll just read a few sentences from this article, and then I'll go to something from somebody else from the NASA website. The decline in Arctic sea ice has accelerated during the few decades of measurement. The first satellite measurements began in 1979. For example, 1/3 of the ice cover within the Arctic Ocean was comprised of very old ice, that's more than 4 years old, at the end of winter maximum extent in March of 1985. So that's not that long ago, 35 years. In contrast, old ice only constituted 1.2% of the ice extent in March of 2019, the last data available at the time I was accessing the website. And first-year ice now dominates the sea ice cover. In summary, quote, the Arctic sea ice cover has transformed from an older, thicker, and stronger ice mass in the 1980s to a younger, thinner, more fragile ice mass in recent years, end quote. And there I'm quoting the Arctic Report Card 2019 put out by NOAA. And then I break the recent and likely near-term changes in ice cover and volume and their consequences for the rapid heating of the planet. Even assuming constant cloudiness, a global radiative heating of 0.71 watts per meter squared relative to the 1970 baseline results from an ice-free Arctic Ocean. And ice-free is defined as 1 million square kilometers or less of ice in the Arctic. This is equivalent to the effect of 1 trillion tons of CO2 emissions, suggesting that the additional heating due to complete Arctic sea ice loss would hasten global warming by an estimated 25 years. And here I'm quoting P. Stone and colleagues in Geophysical Research Letters, volume 46 from 2019. And that global radiative forcing of 0.71 watts per meter squared translates to more than half a degree Celsius, more than a half a degree increase in temperature, in global average temperature, resulting from the, quote, ice-free Arctic. Then I go on in this paper to summarize. It seems likely that the ice-free Arctic, incorrectly projected to occur in 2016, plus or minus 3 years, based on data through 2007. And here I'm citing the paper by Maslowski and colleagues in the Annual Review of Earth and Planetary Sciences from 2012. Indicating that based on data through 2007, that incorrect projection almost certainly lies in the near future. The resulting loss of albedo indicates a very rapid rise in global average temperature shortly after this defining event. And that doesn't include aerosol masking, for example. And if you add up all of the other elements besides just heating associated with the loss of ice, you add up the reduction in aerosol masking and so forth, it looks like we're headed for the 5 to 6 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise, explained by Strona and Bradshaw in their scientific reports paper from November 2018, necessary to cause loss of all life on Earth. So the rapidity of change is critical here, and that's why this 5 to 6 degree temperature rise is different than any previous global average temperature rise of that magnitude. So the conclusion of the paper I'm quoting from in Earth and Environmental Science Research and Reviews, the conclusion goes, the evidence presented in this paper indicates the strong likelihood of extinction of all life on Earth in the near future. This conclusion based on the ongoing rapid rate of environmental change and the consequent meltdown of the world's nuclear power stations. So we don't even need the meltdown of the nuclear power plants around the globe to cause loss of all life on Earth, as pointed out by Strona and Bradshaw in their scientific reports paper. But either one will do the trick. Now, from NASA's Earth Data website, a quote from Matthew Shoup, a climate scientist at the University of Colorado Boulder. Shoup says, quote, "We don't really control anything here. The Arctic is telling us its story, and we just need to be clever enough to document it," end quote. So basically what Shoup is saying is that nature bats last, is that we're no longer in control and we never were. That maybe it's time to start thinking differently instead of assuming that we can fix every conceivable problem and predicament that arises on Earth. Okay. I'd welcome any questions. I don't see any at the moment, so I'll just continue rattling on talking about the Arctic ice. Now, this live stream was promised. This live stream promised that I would talk about two things: the Arctic ice situation and our trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, the rafting adventure we recently completed. And it was amazing and horrifying and terrifying and death-defying, and it almost killed me. What more do you need to know? It was the adventure of a lifetime. If I took it again, I'm pretty sure it would kill me. That's the very definition of the adventure of a lifetime, isn't it? By the time we would hike the just slightly more than 7.5 miles down the Bright Angel Trail, yes, downhill, and still it almost killed me. By the time we made that hike, I had no ankles left. Instead, my thighs just went all the way to the ground. The swelling was amazing. In addition, by the time I got to the bottom, for the last 1.5 miles, one of my boots delaminated, so the outsole was flopping off of the boot, of the hiking boot. And so every time I took a step, I scooped up sand and rocks, and that was quite uncomfortable to walk on. And then by the time I got to the bottom, the other shoe had lost its outsole completely. So the heat and aridity of that 115-degree day and the aridity of the southwestern United States hiking into the Grand Canyon delaminated the boots, the hiking boots I was wearing, and caused loss of one sole and pretty much disintegration of the other sole, having no impact on my sole whatsoever because I don't have one. Okay. Oh, there's a question. That's outstanding. Do we know why the blob of warm water rising under the Arctic Sea?
That's the second one.
There's another one before that?
The first one is from Osama. Does all the
Daniel asks, how do we submit questions? You just type them in there, Daniel.
No, before that.
Okay.
Does all the fresh water pouring off Greenland cause sea ice extent to appear high?
Okay. Does all the fresh water pouring off Greenland cause sea ice extent to appear higher than it actually is? Oh. I don't think so. So if I understand the question, the fresh water melting off the Greenland ice sheet, does that cause ice extent, the total area of ice in the Arctic, to appear higher than it actually is? I don't think so. I don't know why that would be, and I don't think that's the case. Loss of Greenland ice, because it's terrestrial ice, and therefore terrestrial water, is causing sea level to rise around the planet. But I don't know that there's any measurable impact on the Arctic, the ice in the Arctic Ocean, and how it would appear in the wake. Okay, sorry, there are things I don't know. Do we know why the blob of warm water is rising under the Arctic sea ice? Beyond just simple physics, that hot water rises, hot air rises, I don't know an explanation. I read the paper in Science about that topic that came out within the last few days, and as nearly as I can tell, there is no explanation given beyond the physics of the matter. So specific to that region, no comment, apparently. What site do you use to see the Arctic sea ice? There are several, and in fact, I typed in Arctic sea ice into the search engine on my phone, and I came up with several. First of all, there's a list of peer-reviewed articles that appear, and then there's one that I check quite regularly because it's very accessible, at least for me, is the nsidc.org, the National Sea Ice Data, National Snow and Ice Data Center, which gives frequent updates. There's also JAXA, J-A-X-A, there's also NASA, and recently, because of this paper in Science, there's a lot of information about that paper, people's commenting in the corporate media and so forth. But you don't have to look very far to find any number of sites that provide information, either extent, which is total cover, and or volume of the Arctic sea ice. And both of them look pretty horrible right now. What brought you to Central Florida? Was an ecological climate reason for work? No. For one thing, I haven't been paid for 11 and a half years, so I can go wherever I want. On the downside, I haven't been paid for 11 and a half years, so that limits the number of places I can go. We moved here because my partner's father is ill, and two of her siblings, a brother and a sister, live in this area. So we wanted to be able to help with her father's illness. So I came here for the same reason each of my last 4 moves has occurred. Love. Due to the nature of scientists being berated for sounding the alarm or announcing historical events, do you think anyone will publicly announce BOE, that's a blue ocean event, or an ice-free Arctic? What is your synopsis about how close we are? Well, those are 2 questions. And will anyone publicly announce a blue ocean event or an ice-free Arctic? I would be surprised if any paid climate scientist went on record as saying we're close to or beyond an ice-free Arctic. In fact, the latest paper in Science indicates that the Arctic Ocean is going to be ice-free by as soon as, wait for it, 2035. Well, that's ridiculous. 15 years? I'd more likely give us 15 days than 15 years. So that seems very optimistic to me, but that's the nature of papers that get published, is they tend to be very, very conservative. There are consequences for telling the full truth, and we can have a whole session on that topic based on what has happened to me in my life, but we're not going to do that today. My synopsis about how close we are, I would be very surprised if we don't have a blue ocean event this year, between now and the end of September. And the analyses I've seen indicating the rate of change right now, how quickly the Arctic ice is being lost in terms of both cover and volume, that all indicates to me that we are very near the end. That the paper by Maslowski and colleagues projecting an ice-free Arctic in 2016 plus or minus 3 years, that means 2019, I would guess that they only missed it by a year, that 2020 is it. Now, this does not mean that we're going to go extinct the day after a blue ocean event, the day after there's an ice-free Arctic, by its definition of 1 million square kilometers or less. Rather, there's a lag, as I've pointed out repeatedly in my videos and in my writing. There's a lag between when an event occurs, such as an ice-free Arctic, such as a rapid rise in regional temperature associated with COVID-19 and the loss of industrial activity, and so on. There's a lag between when that happens and when the ecological consequences are experienced. So we can have an ice-free Arctic, and we might not even notice at the level of society until the following growing season. It might be apparent during that growing season. I'm just not sure. I strongly suspect, though, that the consequences of COVID-19 and the attendant reduction in industrial activity at various spots around the globe, I suspect that will trigger loss of aerosol masking sufficient to have already caused a global average increase in temperature. And I say that because the loss of masking was estimated various places around the globe, and the increases in temperature were reported as having occurred regionally. Now, that happened at a perfect time for us as human animals, late winter, early spring, and then through the summer. So at least initially, the ecological response in the form of plants, for example, there was little impact. After all, trees and other perennial plants were using carbohydrates they had stored the previous autumn in the northern hemisphere to grow in spring of this year. When will, the big question for me is, when will grain crops experience a significant decline as a result of the loss of aerosol masking? And I'd be very surprised if that didn't happen this year with the major crops that matter, soybeans and corn. I'd prefer that it not happen this year, obviously, but I suspect it will. On the other hand, I've suspected it would happen in previous years as well. So maybe I'm just an unreliable source. If it doesn't happen this year, how could we avoid it in another year in light of the impending, if not this year, then certainly soon, impending blue ocean event? I don't think we can put it off until 2035 by any stretch of the imagination. And bear in mind, at the planetary scale, at the level of our species, the difference between now and 2035 is essentially nothing. On the other hand, the difference between now and 2035 for you and me and the people we interact with on a regular basis is very important. 15 years can be a very long time. At the level of society, at the level of the planet, it's nothing. At the level of us, of you and me, it's a big deal. So, Joey, I hope I answered your question, albeit in an incredibly long-winded manner. The Doomsday Glacier in the Antarctic. Do you have any information or personal opinion on this? The Doomsday Glacier is reaching doomsday very quickly, and there's a lot of information available about this, potentially causing an abrupt, strongly measurable rise in sea level and calving right now, as expected, as predicted, based on what happened with previous glaciers in Antarctica, predicted by several people to cause sea level rises that will pose a daunting challenge to civilization within a year or two. So if there's this set of living arrangements remaining, industrial civilization, in a year or two, then the Doomsday Glacier in Antarctica will almost certainly cause the demise of this set of living arrangements. That's my take. How is the Laptev sea shelf holding up? Not well at all. And I saw a recent paper about the Laptev or a report, and I'm not going to be able to come up with it right now, but it's one of the two places mentioned in recent posts from NASA as looking like a dire situation. The Laptev and the Bering Sea are both looking pretty ugly from the standpoint of ice extent. Why are the people in the famous picture on the ship smiling? That's a good question. The Mosaic ship. Maybe they're grimacing. Maybe that's not smiles at all. It's funny how people react. You know, sometimes we laugh nervously, not because we think something is funny, but because something hits us as being odd, or it's just nervous laughter, like we don't know how else to respond, so we give it a chuckle. Maybe that's what's going on, or maybe those people are just so happy to be alive for another day. Maybe they know about the projection by Maslowski and colleagues in the annual review paper, and so they're just happy to be alive. That would be my take. But my take doesn't seem to match the take of many climate scientists. Do you think the methane releases this week are leading to a large methane burp, or has that already happened? It's so hard to tell because the information we receive is so limited in extent and not to mention accuracy. I think that, and it's not just my thoughts, this is supported by abundant data at this point. Since 2007, methane has gone exponential in the atmosphere. So we know that's going on. Is that a result of some sort of burst of methane, such as the one predicted by Shakova and colleagues in 2008 at the European Geophysical Union meetings? Maybe, or maybe it's that and the methane coming off of melting permafrost, terrestrial permafrost, or maybe it's the East Siberian Arctic shelf plus many other places in the Arctic region, plus many other places throughout the globe that are releasing methane quite rapidly. We know for sure that methane is increasing in the atmosphere, and that after a lag between about 2000 and 2007, when it plateaued, when it tabled off, it has again gone exponential since 2007. So that's a long time, and that explains why atmospheric methane readings are so high, even removing the data points that are said to be outliers up in the approximately 3,000 parts per billion range. So there are a lot of reports in the neighborhood of 2,000 parts per billion, which is a lot of methane. What ecosystem will replace the one that fires in California are destroying? Most likely, based on the evidence I've seen so far and my studies in fire ecology go back to my undergraduate days, which is nearly 4,327 years ago. I suspect it will be California chaparral, that it will be largely resprouting species of manzanita and others in response to the loss of the overstory removal. I also suspect there will be a lot of soil erosion to follow in the wake of those large fires. So the fires are threatening lots of homes, obviously, lots of structures, people's lives, and also if you look to the longer view, and here I'm talking about the long view being less than 5 years out, we can expect large-scale changes in plant life, in plant communities, and also a lot of soil erosion. In the early days, before people knew a lot about the relationship between those fires in California and the soil erosion, there were large slumps of soil right onto the freeways in the wet winters following those fires. So I suspect we'll see more of that because very little has been done in terms of infrastructure to deal with those kinds of soil slumps. Thank you, Maya, for joining as a member. Can you talk about the relation of commodity markets and information regarding crop losses, speculation, etc.? You know, one of the reasons we have, and this was Pauline's idea, one of the reasons we put out these nearly daily videos, basically every weekday that the markets are open in the United States, the stock markets. One of the reasons we do that is because of the relationship between a reduction in industrial activity and the consequent increase in regional and then global temperature. And so there is a well-documented, now documented by more than 24 peer-reviewed papers going back to 1929, there's a well-documented relationship between a reduction in industrial activity and an increase in temperature, first regionally and then globally. That said, it appears to me that the stock markets are completely disconnected from reality. And I understand that there's something called the plunge protection team, even though that makes me a conspiracy theorist and paranoid to even mention it, although it's been documented since the Reagan administration as having existed. The plunge protection team goes in as the stock markets in the United States, at least, are plunging and throws a lot of government money at the markets to stabilize the decline. So because of that and other reasons, there might not be an easily documented relationship between a decline in industrial activity and a decline in the stock markets. The stock markets have just gone insane at this point. That they continue to go up is a sign of societal insanity, not a sign that the people are making any money. Today's morning video included a headline, a quote from Jeff Bezos saying that Amazon will go bankrupt. Now, obviously, he wasn't talking about this week or this month or even during his lifetime, but I bet it'll happen within his lifetime because we're all going to die within his lifetime, or most of us. And so that's going to be really bad for Amazon stock. If all humans died off all of a sudden, so no humans left on Earth after the melting down of all nuclear power plants, do you think Earth and other life would be able to recover? No, absolutely not. And there's two reasons. First, the paper by Strona and Bradshaw clearly indicates that a 5 to 6 degree Celsius global average rise in temperature will be sufficient to destroy all life on Earth. All life on Earth. And tack on a paper quoted in my often updated essay, Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored, indicating that even tardigrades will not survive abrupt climate change. If you can't get tardigrades to survive, and Strona and Bradshaw's very well detailed and documented efforts indicate the loss of all life on Earth, then that means all life on Earth. There will be no recovery. Secondly, the nuclear power plants come along. They are not needed. They are sufficient but not necessary for the loss of all life on Earth. And this based on a 2020 paper by Tim Mosu and Moeller in Frontiers in Plant Science, indicating that plant life will be destroyed by nuclear power plants, by ionizing radiation. And if plant life goes, I strongly suspect that takes all life with it. So there's two reasons, pick your poison. We don't need both of them. We only need one of them. And that will lead to the loss of all life on Earth. Please tell us about the nuclear reactors. What happens step by step, starting immediately after grid down level societal collapse. And I don't even think we need that. We don't need the grid to fail, although all nuclear power plants that I'm aware of, certainly all of them in the United States, depend upon grid-tied power to operate. Now that's a hell of a way to build a system, isn't it? You build nuclear power plants so that they can provide energy, but they depend upon energy from the grid to operate. Once people start walking away, once we even have a significant, quote, accident at a nuclear power plant, there's abundant evidence from the sociological literature indicating that people are not going to hang around to see what happens next. Even first responders stop responding within a relatively short period of time and go home to their own families, go home to the people they love to make sure they're okay, or perhaps to spend their last remaining hours, days, weeks with the people they love. So I think for a couple of reasons, we cannot count on anybody hanging around to help slow the process of ionizing radiation leaking all over the atmosphere. In addition, remember that it takes 50 or 60 years, according to David Jasko. Is that his name, Pauline? Gregory Jasko. At the time, the latest ex-head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States, and this based on a question Pauline asked at a public gathering. And he said it would take 50 to 60 years, if the money were available, to safely decommission a nuclear power plant. Well, we haven't started on that project, and as nearly as I can tell, we won't. We needed 50 or 60 years, and we needed to get started 50 or 60 years ago, back when nuclear power was still a relatively new idea. So I don't see that happening. What I would really love to see, and I've written about this now and then, and it will be the subject of my weekly hubris paper that is coming out September 1st. I would love to see a commitment of some kind to preparing for Chernobyl-like conditions. At Chernobyl, when Chernobyl melted down, at least they went in and poured a bunch of concrete to form a sarcophagus around the potential sources of ionizing radiation. And I think that helped a lot. I'm not sure that's even possible at nuclear power plants near the coasts. So I don't know that it would be possible at, say, Fukushima, much less the many nuclear power plants in the United States that are right on the coast. But I think it's long past time we started making some sort of commitment to, even if it's only an emergency, even if it won't work, to developing some sort of emergency plan to deal with those nuclear power facilities before everything goes south. A chart showing CO2 and global temperature shows CO2 spiking, but temperature hitting a ceiling. Is ice causing the ceiling? The way I read the chart, temperature will rise to 12 degrees C when the ice goes away. Maybe, although I don't know, and I think nobody knows why the global average temperature of Earth has varied from about 12 to about 22 degrees C over the last 2 billion years. So the ice ages are at 12 C, that's the global average temperature, it's not a ball of ice. There's still extant forests and plant and animal communities at the tropics, for example, during an ice age. And then the temperature tends to stabilize at 22 degrees C. One time in the last 2 billion years, it went up to 23 degrees C, but then it comes down. And I don't know that anybody knows why that is. This time may well be different. The research cited by Sam Carana indicates that we're going to 18C in the not too distant future. And there's a paper I cite in my the essay I updated regularly for a long time and then stopped when I moved to Belize because we didn't have the infrastructure to allow it to happen. So that very long essay is called Climate Change Summary and Update, and there's a link to it at the top of the blog. And it indicates that we're headed for 57 or 60 degrees Celsius global average temperature as a result of the ongoing activities. So that could be that we're headed for 57 or 60, and that would be enough to boil away the oceans. And that would be darned inconvenient. So there's still a lot of things we don't understand about Earth's climate system, including why we go almost always from 12 to 22 with in the last 2 billion years, very few stops or stabilizations in between. One of the infrequent periods of stabilization between occurred a few thousand years ago at a relatively cool 13.5 degrees Celsius, just 1.5 degrees Celsius above the ice age. Temperature stabilized there at that relatively cool temperature and allowed us to grow grains at scale. So once you're able to grow, store, and distribute grains at scale, you have civilizations arise. And that's the most reasonable explanation I can find for why civilizations popped up all around the globe when we reached that relatively cool temperature and that temperature stabilized at the global level. So shortly thereafter, there's civilizations popping up like trolls on YouTube, no offense. And before that, there had been no evidence of any civilizations at all. Can you explain why a friend in California near some of the fires is saying that many bats are flying around during the day there? Do you think it's because of their habitat loss or the smoke? That's a fine question, and it actually ties into the river trip we just completed. When we saw bats flying around during the day and all the time at twilight and sunrise, when it seemed to me it was far too bright for bats to be flying around. Shortly after we got to the Grand Canyon the first time, we went to drop off a duffel so that the mule would haul it down the trail the next day. So this is the day before we started walking down the trail. We just went into the park and dropped off a duffel at the mule barn. And it's the middle of the day, and there's bats flying all over the place. I don't know why. Could it be the smoke? Could it be the loss of habitat? Sure, I suspect it's a combination of both of those and probably other factors as well. I suspect it's increasingly difficult for bats to feed themselves as habitat is disappearing all over the planet. And big thanks to my friend Trent Black for donating, in my name even, to a nonprofit organization in Australia that's trying to feed the bats and keep them alive. So I suspect there's a lot going on here. It's a complicated system or set of systems, and it's not surprising to me that we're seeing all kinds of cases of what we would consider abnormal activities by various species, and bats are just one among many examples. And I can't explain it fully. I can only come up with plausible suggestions for why it might be happening. Not even the roaches will be spared, that's right. So if you were interested in eating cockroaches in the days ahead, sorry, that's just not going to happen for much longer. Do you have any idea of time frame when we start feeling the major effects of ACL? Anterior cruciate ligament? Is that the one in the knee? I don't know what you mean. Can you explain that for me? Crops have been failing for years now. Oh, abrupt climate. I don't know. I don't know what ACL means. Maya, can you explain that to me? Crops have been falling for several years now, and with the ice at the North Pole, seems like it's speeding up now. Yes, I suspect so. And crops around the globe have been declining. Crop productivity has been declining or failing at various places around the globe. And yet we've managed to maintain at the global level a relatively high yield each year so far. Will this be the year that there is a catastrophic decline in crop production? It would surprise me if it didn't happen. But I've been surprised before. So, any idea of the time frame when we start feeling the major effects of ACL? If ACL refers to abrupt climate change, then many people are feeling it right now. There's a paper in Science Advances from from earlier this year. I'm not gonna be able to come up with the authors or the title. Sorry about that. It's in my Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored essay at guymcpherson.com. But that paper indicates that we are already experiencing lethal wet bulb temperatures around the globe, particularly in tropical and subtropical regions. So it's happening. People are dying in large numbers as a result of climate change. It's not being reported much, and certainly not in the so-called first world, that people are dying in other places, most notably in the places near the tropics. But it's happening. It's already happening. Do you think news about grain crop failures will be open and available to the public? Past empires have depended on grain ships arriving just in the nick of time, and so have we. This civilization depends, as all previous civilizations have, on the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at scale. So when we're unable to do that, when the ship doesn't arrive in time, when the crop goes south, we're in real trouble. Will it take 2 years of crop failure for that to happen before civilization collapses? I don't know. I bet not. I think we're clinging to a thin thread already with respect to crop failure for this fall in the Northern Hemisphere. And because there are now 7.7, 7.8 billion people on the planet, it's not as if we can turn somewhere else. It's not as if we can go to another crop or another location. And of course, adding to our challenges ahead, the Trump administration sold the existing grain surplus to China earlier this year. So we don't have a lot to feed our own folks. Thank you, Maya, for clarifying. ACL meant abrupt climate change, so I think my previous response made sense, if only to me. So, Don, do I think news about the crop failures will be open and available to the public? It's astonishing to me how brilliantly the corporate media have managed to hide relevant information so far. It's just amazing that every day we read in the corporate media good news about the stock markets, good news about the monetary system, good news. You know, Jeff Bezos just announced that Amazon is going to go bankrupt. And I strongly suspect that the response of the stock market will be to go up. Let me just check. You know, he made that announcement yesterday, I believe, after the markets closed. And sure enough, all the major indices in the United States are up right now. The Dow Jones and NASDAQ and the S&P 500 continuing to climb even after Jeff Bezos, the $200 billion man, says that Amazon is going to fail. What? What does it take for the stock markets to respond in what I would consider a rational manner? I don't know, because I'm only 60. It hasn't happened so far. All right. Do we have a reasonably accurate idea of how much total methane is stored under oceans and land masses that can be released? And if so, do you think it's enough to kill off large mammals? Oh, yeah, there's more than enough to do that. I can't remember the numbers offhand, although I present them in either Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored, or in Climate Change Summary and Update. So you can just open those and search on methane, and I bet you'll come up with a number that'll boggle your mind. The total amount of planetary methane in the form of permafrost and subsea methane, either of those alone is enough to destroy all mammals. In fact, a recent paper in the peer-reviewed literature, again quoted in Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored, indicates that mammals can't keep up already. So vertebrates the ability of vertebrates is being outstripped by a factor of 10,000 times, Mammals can't keep up either. We're vertebrate mammals. It sounds like bad news to me. Oh my. The number of pictures of dissolving starfish and sick whales has tapered off since the first days of Fukushima. Could this also be due to after effects from nuclear testing in the post-war period? Could be. I don't know enough about that, and I don't even know the right people to ask. We had a nuclear expert on the radio show a few months ago, and we didn't even go there because there's only enough time to cover a finite number of topics. Do you think USA is a democracy? No, it was never established as a democracy. It was established as a republic, and it has never been anywhere close to a democracy or even a republic. It's a fascist state at this point. It has been for a long time. I quoted this is in my 2005 book, Killing the Natives. I quoted a paper from considerably before then, maybe 1995, indicating that there were 7 characteristics of fascism, and the United States met all of them. And that was a while ago. So this wasn't just, last Tuesday. The United States has been a fascist country for quite a long time. It was never a democracy. It was barely a republic for a relatively short period of time. It's really a corporatocracy or a fascist state. The stock market at this point is a glorified pyramid scheme. I don't think it's glorified. Well, minor difference of opinion there. Comment on recent crop damage in Midwest due to high winds. I didn't know about it. So maybe, Dan, you can comment or provide a link here in the comment section, because I haven't heard about that. But bear in mind that up until a couple of days ago, I was participating in that rafting adventure for a couple of weeks. So I was out of the news cycle, as it were. 17,634 people died of hunger so far today. I'm not surprised. Well, I'm surprised it's not more, but it's morning. Would you suggest that those of us that still hold some stocks sell them now? No, I would make no such suggestion. If you had any idea of the financial decisions I've made in my life, you would ask me what to do and then do the exact opposite. So I'm not a financial advisor, consultant, whatever. I don't know what to do. I thought the market was done, and I sold everything. I got out of the stock markets in 2000, I believe it was. So, I've missed out on only 2 or 3 doublings of the market since then. So I'm the wrong person to ask. And don't ask your financial advisor either, because they lie to you. Thank you, Hans, for your notable donation. Yes, Bezos said, quote, "I predict one day Amazon will fail. Amazon will go bankrupt," end quote. And of course, all companies will fail eventually. I suspect most of them will fail before the last person on Earth dies, considerably before then, in fact. But that's where we're headed. So I view the stock markets and the abundance of attention paid by the corporate media in the United States to corporations. I view that all as a huge distraction. If your everyday life depends upon which way the stock market is moving, I would suggest that you need to reorganize your everyday life. If you're living with urgency, regardless of what happens with stock markets, if you're trying to improve the lives of the people around you, regardless of what happens with the stock market, I think those are good things. And I think this overwhelming attention that the corporate media pay to the stock market, and we get dragged along with it, I think that has adverse consequences for the way we conduct our lives. if you're worried daily about whether you're going to make or lose money today based on a system over which you have no control, if you're worried about what's going on with your money, maybe it's time to do something different with your money. There's a lot of houseless people who could use a buck here and there. There's a lot of people who are suffering greatly. And it always makes me feel better when I can do something for humans or non-human animals that are not getting along well in life. So you might consider trying to improve the lot of somebody else. And when I do that, it always makes me feel a lot better. The water level of the Colorado River, is it down? No, interestingly enough, because of the Glen Canyon Dam completed in 1963, the water level is closely regulated for the entire stretch of the Colorado River below the Glen Canyon Dam all the way to Lake Mead. And our float did a considerable part of that stretch. And so what you see is every day at 8 a.m. at the dam, they release a bunch of water, and they release it all day. Why? Because that's when electrical demand is highest. It's a hydroelectric dam. So they release a bunch of water, the turbines turn, produce electricity, and they keep that going until about 5 p.m. Then people go home. So the energy load is reduced when people aren't working, when people aren't at their workplace. So we observed the Colorado River goes by at about 4 miles an hour. That's the rate at which the river is flowing. The current is flowing. And so what we saw was 8 a.m. at the Glen Canyon Dam meant a different time where we were, because we were downstream, downriver quite a ways. By the time we finished, in fact, we were almost exactly 48 hours below the Glen Canyon Dam. So at 8 a.m. that day, the water just started rising. And at first it makes a sort of gurgling noise, and then it starts roaring as the water level increases. But the water level increased and decreased less than a foot each day. It was pretty close to about 8 inches that it would go up and down. Now, there was some variation depending upon where we are in the river, whether it was a wide stretch or a relatively narrow stretch. But in general, since 1963, the river has been pretty stable. There was one exception in the 1980s. I can't remember what year it was. They had, and it was a big El Nino southern oscillation year, and so there's a lot of rain falling, and the Lake Powell behind the Glen Canyon Dam was full, and they didn't really know what to do because this had never happened before. They were holding on to that full bank of water because it meant money when they could release it and get the turbines rotating. So they did, and pretty soon it was so high it started to go over the top of the Glen Canyon Dam. And then they realized we're in emergency, and they released a bunch of water, and all those rafters downstream from there suddenly were faced with a life or death situation, literally, and people died, and they helicoptered a lot of people out. It was a big deal. So since then, they've been paying pretty close attention to what happens with the water levels, and if they're going to release, if they plan to release more than the customary amount of water between 8 and 5, they let people know well in advance. And that's one of the good things that's happening there. Let's see, do you have any new info on ecological damage being done by continuing radiation coming out of Fukushima, especially in the ocean? No, I don't. There's a lot of things I don't track anymore, and that's one of them. I think Fukushima is an extinction level event for humans and many other organisms on Earth. Fortunately, I think overheating is going to kill us between now and then, so we won't suffer from lethal mutations associated with ionizing radiation. We're going to go faster than that. What's your current view of Extinction Rebellion, and are there other protest movements we should pay attention to? It's pretty impressive, the ability of the corporate media to latch on to any new thing as if it is the only thing happening in the world. And that happened with Extinction Rebellion. I don't know if you noticed, but for several months there, after Extinction Rebellion made the stage, they were everything. They were in the news every day all over the world. There were people getting arrested and thrown in jail and protesting and blah, blah, and this and blah, blah, and that. And the whole time Extinction Rebellion was demanding that governments do things that governments will never do. First item on their list, tell the full truth. Really? From a government? Are you out of your mind? And that's been my take on Extinction Rebellion. The leaders, the speakers, and the writers for Extinction Rebellion, none of them ever admitted to the full impact of the aerosol masking effect. None of them, not one. I had this conversation with several of them, interviewed one, Roger Hallam, one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, for the radio show, and he just ignored it. They all ignored it. They pretended that the aerosol masking effect didn't exist, that there was no such thing as global dimming, despite the overwhelming evidence, and that tells me that they were being played, properly played, by the corporate media and the governments the corporate media represent. So I'm not impressed. I've never been impressed, and for better and worse, Extinction Rebellion just went away. Something else came along. I don't recall the exact timing. Perhaps it was COVID-19. Perhaps it was the pandemic. But the Extinction Rebellion fit into the relatively short attention span of people in the United States and Western Europe. And so it was promoted as an important movement for a significant amount of time, and then it just went away. What's next? I don't know, but I guarantee you when something quirky comes along and people start paying attention, the mainstream, the corporate media will focus all of our attention on that as if that's the only thing in the world that matters. Because that's what they do. That's what they've been doing for more than 100 years. Would you say that we are already in a period when the only thing of material value is that which we can eat, drink, or shelter with? No. 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 And, one more time, no. I think that there are more important things than staying alive as an individual. I think the way we act toward the people around us, and even to ourselves, is really, really important. I think that love is more important than whether we get to drink water today or tomorrow. So from a pure survival standpoint, yes. From my perspective, we've been there for a long time, at the point where if I can guarantee that I'm going to get through another day, I'm going to be a happy camper, and even when I'm not camping. And by the way, camping right next to the Colorado River when the temperature never drops below 90 degrees Fahrenheit, that's not any fun at all. But I digress. So, on the one hand, yes, I think as individuals we're at the point that we should be damned pleased to get through another day, that we have the privilege to access shelter, food, and water. And that's always been the case for those of us who live privileged lives. And there's more. There are things that we have control over. We have very little control over the fact that we're here at all in physical form, the fact that we were born in a privileged location, the fact that we have access to food and water and shelter every day. We have relatively little control over arriving at this point. We do have some control over how we treat other people, and that's why I think that is so important. That includes providing other people the ability to find food, water, and shelter as well. Thank you for the donation back to Earth 63, and thank you for joining as a member, Scott Andrews. We appreciate that. What is the highest level of methane humans can handle? Extinction levels. Well, that's a good question. I think there's at least two factors that come into play here. First of all, think of methane as a very powerful greenhouse gas that adds to carbon dioxide and at least 40 other greenhouse gases in terms of the warming potential. So if we just take carbon dioxide, currently at about 415 parts per million, and methane, well, I'll just estimate that it's roughly 2,000 parts per billion. Well, methane is more than 100 times more powerful than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So let's just say it's only 100 times more powerful. Then that 2,000 parts per billion of methane becomes the equivalent of 200 parts per million of CO2. Tack that onto the 415, we're at 615 parts per million equivalent CO2 in the atmosphere right now. Remember when 350 was the upper limit? And that doesn't include the numbers I just gave. Those don't include at least 41 other greenhouse gases either. So we are in a dire situation. Okay, the second and more immediate impact is methane and its flammability. People write to me very frequently and ask, they say something like, I heard of a fire, a fireball or a blast or a big fire in some location. Could it be the methane because it was in a remote area? And it seems unlikely to me that would be happening. At least 5% methane is required in the atmosphere to ignite. So unless you have 5 parts per 100, which is a long way from 2 or 3 or even 5,000 parts per billion, unless you have that 5 parts per 100, that 5%, you're not going to be able to ignite methane. So from the perspective of an immediate threat, I don't think methane poses an existential threat. But when you add on atmospheric methane to carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, it already poses an existential threat. What are your thoughts about Beirut situation? Did I mention I've been away from the news for about 2.5 weeks? I have no idea what the Beirut situation is. I didn't even know there was a situation. In the days that are left, how should people who know about NTHE best spend their time? What's on the bucket list? That's a great question. And I would say that the answer differs for every single person on the planet. What's important to me might not be important to you. What's important to me is spending time with those I love. Because I came out as promoting evidence indicating our near-term extinction a long time ago, I don't have many friends left. So that makes it a lot easier for me to make my decisions day to day than it does for most people. You have kids you haven't seen for a while? I know that haunts Pauline to a certain extent because she has not seen her kids for 8 months. And that's difficult for her. Obviously, she loves her children. And other people are in a similar situation. How should you spend your time? Sometimes you won't even be able to have access to your children because they live too far away, because they're in an area that's under quarantine, because of 1,000 other things. It's difficult to get to your children or to those you love. What should you do? I'm not much into shoulding, but I think now more than ever, the evidence is clear that our time is shorter than it's ever been. That applies at the level of you as an individual and at the level of us as a species. Our time is shorter than it has ever been. I would encourage you to act accordingly. Do you have a bucket list that you can actually complete some items on between now and when we're no longer able to travel? Maybe you should do that. One of the reasons Pauline and I are very concerned about other people and our ability to contaminate other people. One of the reasons we took this river trip was because we saw it as probably the only time we would be able to do so. If Pauline creates a film of some kind from our adventure on the Colorado River, it will be called Between Waves. Between Waves applies at two levels. We're between waves in the pandemic. The second wave is just cranking up. And we spent a lot of time between waves, between rapids on the Colorado River. And we took that trip because it was a trip of a lifetime. And I imagine, we both imagine, there's a relatively narrow window of opportunity for us to complete that journey, for us to take part in that adventure. And that was between waves of the pandemic. I read every day that this particular pandemic is not going to have a second wave. Really? The second wave that's already started in some places? So some sources are more reliable than others. If there are things you want to know, want to do, and that you are capable of doing, please do them. If you have the opportunity to pursue an adventure rooted in love, I would never discourage that. All right, so it's been a little more than an hour, and I'd like to wrap this up. So we chatted a little bit about the Colorado River, mostly about the Arctic ice situation. It would, again, to summarize, it would surprise me a lot if we did not have an ice-free Arctic, defined as 1 million square kilometers of ice in the Arctic Ocean, by the end of September. It would surprise me if that didn't happen. It would surprise me if the paper by Maslowski and colleagues was wrong by more than a year. But maybe we'll eke another year out. Maybe the timing will be such that even if we do have an ice-free Arctic, we get another year or two with this set of living arrangements relatively intact. You know, it's difficult to speak authoritatively about this subject because we haven't experienced an ice-free Arctic during the time Homo sapiens has been on the planet. So it's pretty difficult to come up with anything of an idea rooted in reality concerning what comes and how long it takes after the ice-free Arctic. I suspect after an ice-free Arctic we don't have long, but what does that mean? Does that mean weeks, months, years that we have to survive, that this set of living arrangements holds together? I don't know. So with that in mind, I encourage the kinds of things I've been encouraging for a long time, which is the pursuit of love, the pursuit of urgency, to do the things that you want to do, to treat people around you with respect and dignity, to treat people like you want to be respected. It's tough. It's tough not knowing what's going to happen in the near future, much less in the longer term future. So I wish I had a crystal ball, I think, but that didn't work out too well for Cassandra, did it? Anyway, thank you all for joining today. We'll try to put together another one of these within the next week or so. So stay tuned to the Nature Bats Last channel on YouTube. And thanks again to all of you who donated your ideas, your questions, your time, and your money to making this happen. We'll see you in a week or so. Pauline?
Yes.
We'll see you in a week or so.
Okay.
Let's-
See you in a week. Bye.
We'll call it a wrap.